It's August the 31st, 2021, and our reading in 1 Kings today is chapter 22. For 3 years there was no war between Aram and Israel, but in the third year Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, went down to see the king of Israel. The king of Israel had said to his officials, "Don't you know that Ramoth Gilead belongs to us, and yet we're doing nothing to retake it from the king of Aram?" So he asked Jehoshaphat, "Will you go with me to fight against Ramoth Gilead?" Jehoshaphat replied to the king of Israel, "I am as you are, my people as your people, my horses as your horses." But Jehoshaphat also said to the king of Israel, "First, seek the counsel of the Lord." So the king of Israel brought together the prophets, about 400 men, and asked them, "Shall I go to war against Ramoth Gilead, or shall I refrain?" "Go," they answered, "for the Lord will give it into the king's hand." But Jehoshaphat asked, "Is there not a prophet of the Lord here whom we can inquire of?" The king of Israel answered Jehoshaphat, "There's still one man through whom we can inquire of the Lord, but I hate him because he never prophesies anything good about me, but always bad. He is Micaiah, son of Imlah." "The king should not say that," Jehoshaphat replied. So the king of Israel called one of his officials and said, "Bring Micaiah, son of Imlah, at once." Dressed in their royal robes, the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, were sitting on their thrones at the threshing floor by the entrance of the gate of Samaria, with all the prophets prophesying before them. Now Zedekiah, son of Kenana, had made iron horns, and he declared, "This is what the Lord says, with these you will gore the Arameans until they are destroyed." All the other prophets were prophesying the same thing. "Attack Ramoth Gilead and be victorious," they said, "for the Lord will give it into the king's hand." The messenger who had gone to summon Micaiah said to him, "Look, as one man, the other prophets are predicting success for the king. Let your word agree with theirs and speak favorably." But Micaiah said, "As surely as the Lord lives, I can tell him only what the Lord tells me." When he arrived, the king asked him, "Micaiah, shall we go to war against Ramoth Gilead, or shall I refrain?" "Attack and be victorious," he answered, "for the Lord will give it into the king's hand." The king said to him, "How many times must I make you swear to tell me nothing but the truth in the name of the Lord?" Then Micaiah answered, "I saw all Israel scattered on the hills like sheep without a shepherd, and the Lord said, 'These people have no master. Let each one go home in peace.'" The king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, "Didn't I tell you that he never prophesies anything good about me, but only bad?" Micaiah continued, "Therefore hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne with all the host of heaven standing round him on his right and on his left. And the Lord said, 'Who will entice Ahab into attacking Ramoth Gilead and going to his death there?' One suggested this and another that. Finally, a spirit came forward, stood before the Lord, and said, 'I will entice him.' 'By what means?' the Lord asked. 'I will go out and be a lying spirit in the mouths of all of his prophets,' he said. 'You will succeed in enticing him,' said the Lord. 'Go and do it.' So now the Lord has put a lying spirit in the mouths of all these prophets of yours. The Lord has decreed disaster for you." Then Zedekiah, son of Kenana, went up and slapped Micaiah in the face. "Which way did the spirit from the Lord go when he went from me to speak to you?" he asked. Micaiah replied, "You will find out on the day you go to hide in an inner room." The king of Israel then ordered, "Take Micaiah and send him back to Ammon, the ruler of the city, and to Joash, the king's son, and say, 'This is what the king says. Put this fellow in prison and give him nothing but bread and water until I return safely.'" Micaiah declared, "If you ever return safely, the Lord has not spoken through me." Then he added, "Mark my words, all you people." So the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, went up to Ramoth Gilead. The king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, I will enter the battle in disguise, but you wear your royal robes. So the king of Israel disguised himself and went into battle. Now the king of Aram had ordered his 32 chariot commanders, do not fight with anyone small or great except the king of Israel. When the chariot commanders saw Jehoshaphat, they thought, surely this is the king of Israel. So they turned to attack him. But when Jehoshaphat cried out, the chariot commanders saw that he was not the king of Israel and stopped pursuing him. But someone drew his bow at random and hit the king of Israel between the sections of his armor. The king told his chariot driver, wheel round and get me out of the fighting. I've been wounded. All day long the battle raged, and the king was propped up in his chariot facing the Arameans. The blood from his wound ran onto the floor of the chariot, and that evening he died. As the sun was setting, a cry spread through the army, every man to his town, everyone to his land. So the king died and was brought to Samaria, and they buried him there. They washed the chariot at a pool in Samaria where the prostitutes bathed, and the dogs licked up his blood, as the word of the Lord had declared. As for the other events of Ahab's reign, including all he did, the palace he built and inlaid with ivory, and the cities he fortified, are they not written in the book of the annals and of the kings of Israel? Ahab rested with his fathers, and Ahaziah his son succeeded him as king. Jehoshaphat, son of Asa, became king of Judah in the 4th year of Ahab, king of Israel. Jehoshaphat was 35 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem for 25 years. His mother's name was Azubah, daughter of Shilhi. In everything he walked in the ways of his father Asa, and did not stray from them. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. The high places, however, were not removed, and the people continued to offer sacrifices and burn incense there. Jehoshaphat was also at peace with the king of Israel. As for the other events of Jehoshaphat's reign, the things he achieved and his military exploits, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah? He rid the land of the rest of the male shrine prostitutes who remained there even after the reign of his father Asa. There was then no king in Edom. A deputy ruled. Now Jehoshaphat built a fleet of trading ships to go to Ophir for gold, but they never set sail. They were wrecked at Ezion Geber. At that time, Ahaziah, son of Ahab, said to Jehoshaphat, let my men sail with your men, but Jehoshaphat refused. Then Jehoshaphat rested with his fathers and was buried with them in the city of David his father, and Jehoram his son succeeded him. Ahaziah, son of Ahab, became king of Israel in Samaria in the 17th year of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, and he reigned over Israel for 2 years. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord because he walked in the ways of his father and mother and in the ways of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, who caused Israel to sin. He served and worshipped Baal and provoked the Lord, the God of Israel, to anger, just as his father had done. Amen. Well, in verses 1 to 28, we have Jehoshaphat, who is basically a good king, the king of Judah, and he's thinking about entering into an alliance with a view to going to battle with Ahab, who's the king of Israel here, who is just about the wickedest king of them all. Ahab has got 400 prophets, but they're all false prophets. That becomes clear. And as was the custom in those days, they would consult their prophets before going into battle. But Jehoshaphat has got enough discernment and common sense to know that they're a pretty hopeless lot. So that's why he asks then in verse 7, is there not a prophet of the Lord here whom we can inquire of? In other words, yeah, you've got your 400 over there, but they're hopeless. Have you not got a true prophet who can truly help us by telling us what the Lord's will is and what we should do? Ahab responds at that point by saying, yes, there's one. There's one man, And I really hate him. Verse 8, his name is Micaiah, just one true prophet in the whole of the land. And I hate him because he always tells the truth. And he never says anything good about me. Again, this is typical of what we know about King Ahab. Well, eventually, through Jehoshaphat's pressure, Micaiah is brought before the king. Now, when he says in verse 15, agreeing with all the false prophets, Micaiah, shall we go to war against Ramoth Gilead, or shall I refrain? Attack and be victorious, he answered, for the Lord will give it into the king's hand. I think there he is actually mocking the king. Somehow, I don't know how he did it, whether it was through adopting a certain accent or tone of voice, or even dressing up in a certain way. Somehow he pretended to be exactly like those false prophets, and everybody knew that what he was saying was a form of mockery. And that's why the king said to him, how many times must I make you swear to tell me nothing but the truth in the name of the Lord? Even the king had enough common sense to see that he wasn't actually speaking the truth from God. It was a form of mocking. But then he does. And the prophecy that follows is truly an awesome prophecy. And the heart of it, verse 23, the Lord has decreed disaster for you. So after the mocking prophecy, this is the true prophecy. And he is totally different from everybody else's judgment. This is the truth. This is the word from God. Because Ahab doesn't believe that, or doesn't want to believe that. He has him put in prison and so on. But in fact, verses 29 to 40, what Micaiah prophesies is exactly what happens. Ahab is killed in battle by some random arrow, verse 34. He does his best, Ahab, doesn't he, to disguise himself, to hide away from the consequences if the battle doesn't go his way, that he can hide and run away. But remarkably, it says, someone drew his bow at random and hit the king of Israel. It hits him, he dies, and in fact, every part of this, there's nothing random in God's universe. That arrow is guided by God to exactly where he wants it to go. Ahab is not only killed, but all the details surrounding his death, the blood flowing down onto the ground, the dogs licking it up. It says in verse 38, as the word of the Lord had declared. Remember, in previous chapters, Elijah's word said it would happen precisely in that way. Disaster has come upon the wicked king. Verses 41 to 50, a little bit more about Jehoshaphat. He basically, as it says in verse 43, he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. He's a good man. He's a good king. But he has his flaws, and they're quite significant. And the worst one of all is probably this alliance with Ahab. And then finally, verses 51 to 53, Ahab's son, Ahaziah, and rather unsurprisingly, verse 52, we are told, he did evil in the eyes of the Lord. If there's one big lesson for us to learn from this chapter and from the alliance, the rather unlikely, sad alliance between Jehoshaphat and King Ahab. Why did he do that? Why would he do that? There's all sorts of reasons why people do. But the big lesson to learn there is that this was an unholy alliance, which will have very negative consequences. It's dangerous. It leads us in all sorts of ways that we surely don't want to go, whether it's in marriage, whether it's in business, whether it's in ministry. No wonder 2 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 14 puts it as plainly as this: do not be yoked together with unbelievers. For what do righteousness and wickedness have in common? Or what fellowship can light have with darkness?